Hi, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Red Brick Summit, we welcome you all to the panel discussion on women in the future workplace, which has been organized in collaboration with the Confederation of Indian Industry, Center of Excellence for Supply Chain, and the Forum for Industry Interaction, IIM Ahmedabad. This is the first panel discussion organized in the history of TRBS, and we are honored to host it with an esteemed panel to be moderated by Ms. Asha Pillai. Ms. Asha Pillai is the chairperson for CII's India Women's Network, Gujarat. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. In the panel, we have Ms. Madhavi Lall, who is the Managing Director and Head Human Resources India at Deutsche Bank. She has been conferred the Women Leadership Award by the Institute of Public Enterprises-BFSI in 2010 and the Distinguished Alumnus Award by XLRI in 2016. She is the chairperson of the CII India Women Network in the Western region and is also a founding member of the HR Committee for FICCI. Next, we have Ms. Ranjana Maitra, who has built and grown business in healthcare and life sciences domain. She holds an MBA from University of New Haven, Connecticut. After an illustrious corporate career in TCS and Wipro, she's now an influential international education leader. She's also a core committee member of the CII India Women Network Western Region Steering Council. We are also proud to have Ms. Rima Nanavati, who is currently member of the Advisory Council on Gender of the World Bank Group. She oversees around 4,813 self-help groups, 160 cooperatives, and 15 economic federations in 7 South Asian countries, focusing on women's economic empowerment by building women-owned enterprises. She has been working with the SEW Seva since over 35 years, expanding its membership to over 1.5 million members. Next, we have Ms. Shalini Gupta, who's the Vice President Finance at Morgan Stanley and is a CA professional with over 18 plus years of diversified experience leading finance, transition operations, business management, audit and compliance for large global Fortune 500 companies with Accenture, PwC, American Express across regions and roles. Finally, we have Ms. Shubhalakshmi Nandi, who's Senior Program Officer at the India Country Office of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She leads execution of the foundation gender strategy in India, focused on women's economic empowerment. Her career spans over 17 years with area of expertise including macroeconomic policy analysis, engendering of social protection, and transforming microcredit programs, to name a few. We are grateful to you all for joining us for the panel discussion. For any questions to the panel, we request the audience to kindly fill the Google form that has been shared over the description in the YouTube video. Over to you, Asha ma'am.
Many thanks, Ashan, Akansha, and welcome, esteemed panelists. I'm super thrilled to sort of being, getting on a platform and doing this with all of you. When I started looking at, future of the workforce and women in the future workforce, it was, a few things jumped out to me straight away. The first is how much progress we have made thus far. It's not as if we haven't made some significant progress, globally and in the country. As far as women are concerned, although there's a lot more work to do, diversity at least is a priority for most organizations. Having said that, there's a lot more work to do. The second piece is around unconscious biases, right? So we can have 30% of women or 50% of women in the workplace, but we still continue to sort of, be, the single woman in meetings, sort of battling unconscious biases of the double blind, the likability bias vis-a-vis the, treated as aggressive if we are sort of put our point sternly, for instance. In fact, Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 presidential election for various reasons, one of them being Cambridge Analytica. But the one thing that people continually say as reason for not voting her is that she's not likable enough, so clearly at that level also there's this unconscious bias that plays heavily into, how women are perceived. The third piece is around the impact of the pandemic, which has been really interesting. It sort of has brought forward, all of the unpaid care work that women normally tend to undertake. And that's really the new normal. So that's a good thing. There's also opportunity for further flexibility, given that now companies and a number of industries have been able to have their employees work from home and haven't missed a beat. Having said that, there's data in the New York Times that says 1 million women have sort of quit jobs over the last quarter, simply because there wasn't childcare available, and they had to sort of take care of their children, etc., and couldn't manage the both in the workplace. So that's again a very interesting dilemma that the pandemic has put forth. And this is just the privileged lot, who's continuing to sort of work and work from home. There's also an entirely different social spectrum that we will have to navigate and think about. And that, of course, that spectrum of women, is something that we need to sort of keep in the forefront of our policy making as well. And that's why I'm really thrilled to have Ms. Rima Nanavati here, who heads SEVA and has 2 million women registered under them. This is potentially the invisible women workforce we don't pay attention to enough. Role of the families is another piece that is a really critical influencer when it comes to women and their careers. Now, there was an article in 2018 by The Economist that said how India fails its women. And apparently the data showed that from 2005 to 2018, there's a drop in women participating in the workforce. And it is just because it was socially acceptable for women to not work and be at home if they come from middle class to upper middle class families. So there is a real incentive that needs to be provided, not just from corporate policies, but also by the families to encourage women to continue in the workforce. And finally, future of the workplace itself. And this is not just in terms of women, but overarching future of the workplace is thrown into question, considering there is an enormous amount of automation that we are talking about, the artificial intelligence that potentially is going to make a number of jobs redundant. And there's data that says that by 2030, 30 million women need to sort of reskill themselves, but not just women, that sort of is across the spectrum. As managing finance for Shell, I also am aware that we're talking about bots taking over routine analytical work, etc. So the skills that need to be brought into the workplace is going to be very different. And what does that do to women in the workplace is another dilemma. So there is a whole array of factors that play into sort of how women will be represented in the workplace. And there's a whole array of factors that needs to incentivize women to be in the workplace. There's definitely advantages to having women leaders, as we have seen in the New Zealand example. And there is a clear business case that has also been laid out, but there's a lot more work to be done. With that, I will invite each panelist to provide their opening comments and what comes to their mind when we talk about future of the workforce and for women in particular. Please, may I begin with Ms. Nanavati and in the context of SEVA as well.
Namaste, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's real honor and privilege to be in the midst of vice presidents and CEOs and CFOs and the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation. And I will be completely talking about, the women who are very often called as the bottom of the pyramid, but we at SEVA call them as the wheels of the pyramid, because I think it is these women that keep the economy growing, the economy moving, even in the current situation, as you were explaining, Asha ji, that, the economy at large, the world at large is going through a huge transition. And that has brought about a lot of uncertainty, a lot of automation is going to set in. But I think what I would like to really talk about is that what is the reality of work and life of these informal sector women workers who I represent, about 2 million of them. And for several of these workers, survival itself has become a question. The livelihoods of most of these workers, both in the urban and the rural areas, have been directly destroyed. And there's lack of access to market, lack of transportation services available, interruptions in the supply chain, and as a result, these women are the informal sector women workers are thrown out of the economy. We all see that there are these relief packages which are being, declared and they are reaching. But, relief and loans, especially as relief, work only when the economy is functioning. But when the economy is fractured, loans do not really make a huge difference into the lives of these informal sector workers. A survey that was conducted by us showed that 73% of the informal sector workers, and amongst them almost 60% women, have lost their means of livelihood. What is even more sad is that 34% of the children, and amongst them girls who had already started, seeking education, are all now dropping out of school. And I think, therefore, what you are talking about, the future of work and the workplace, is definitely a means of concern. I would end by just giving a quote from one of the waste collectors. We all see that if they don't work, then the cities and the areas where we live will become. But she was telling me, her name is Shanta Ben, and she was telling me that, sister, it feels like somebody has collectively pinched all the daily wage earners and snatched away everything from us. And especially, she says that this is worse than the riots. When there are riots, you can migrate and go back to your village. But in current situation, you can't even migrate and go back to another area and start working. And but how can in this disease everybody is expected to sit at home. For the waste collectors especially, they see on the television that collecting waste is even more hazardous now because there may be COVID affected material in the waste. Gloves, even if they wear, they last only for an hour. And therefore she says that, how do we feed our family? So when everybody was sitting at home in a lockdown, she was forced to go out and work. And I'm quoting her example because you just mentioned that, robotics and AI and everything, the scenario at the workplace is going to change. But being a waste collector, she started going to this government civil hospital and working as a skilled plumber. And I was asking her that, did you have that skill? And she said, no. But, in order to feed my family on the job, I learned how to repair the leaking taps or, the clogged in drainage lines. So I think what I want to place here on record is that it's a sad story, but it also gives you the hope that the future lies in the hands of women. And it is the women who will shape the economy and the future of the workplace. Women are so very agile that, they are willing to reskill themselves, upskill themselves, diversify the skill set, and they will continue working. So I'll just end here.
Thank you, Ms. Madhavi. And I think that's a really powerful point that you made, that women can reskill and upskill. And I think there is also a lot of adaptability and humility, and not to sort of box women into a particular stereotype. But it sounds like there's a lot more flexibility that women have. There's another example that I sort of read about in the Mint, I think, some weeks ago, where there was a restaurant manager who lost his job, and he sort of took on the job of sort of waste picking, getting into garbage trucks the whole day, leaving his mobile phone at home and sort of going about, collecting garbage and coming back home, not looking anything like, a restaurant manager, but more like a rag picker. So the economy is in dire straits, and no doubt about it. And I think that it's really important to sort of acknowledge that, and especially like in a country like India, where we've got a 23% dive in the GDP. May I come to Madhavi? And Madhavi, you've sort of been in the thick of it, managing HR for Deutsche Bank, and what comes to your mind when you think about future of the workforce for women, and in terms of policy as well. What's the kind of debates and the dilemmas that all of you as a leadership team are thinking about?
Thanks, Asha. First of all, thanks to you and IIM Ahmedabad for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. Rima, I think when you were talking, I was just thinking, is there something that we can do? I mean, I know it's not part of this discussion, but happy to work with you offline to see whether we can support in any way, because like you and Asha have said, obviously the situation that we are in today as a country, as a world, is not the best, and it's just sad to see so many sort of cases, that of people being unemployed. I have a few people who were, sort of working in the parlor nearby that's closed, and the women are really struggling, and we're trying to get them help as well. So, but please let us know if there's anything that we can do, in terms of helping out.
Thank you so much.
I'll just sort of, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about, this topic on gender diversity is being spoken in so many forums, and always there's a question about, should we keep discussing this topic? It's kind of, I think we've discussed to death, honestly, and the fact is the gender diversity hasn't moved across all sectors, hasn't really moved. While there have been some step changes, so if I look back at my 30 years, there has been change in the workplace. But I think there's a long way to go. And there's some research that has been published that if we continue doing the things we're doing today, it'll take us 100 years to achieve, gender equality. So obviously this topic needs to be discussed, needs to be thought through. I think we need to sort of get some sort of, common discussion around what we can do to sort of speed up this whole journey really. And I wouldn't really blame anybody, because I think it's centuries of, how society has evolved. As society evolved, somehow women became the homemakers, and the men became the earners, and they kind of got that power, the powers, equation, got sort of set pretty much early on. And obviously the whole business case around diversity is a given. I mean, I don't even think that today people really want to discuss that business case or develop that business case. That's a given. But there's lots to be done. So I can talk about Deutsche Bank. We have a strong support to diversity and inclusion, as many multinational corporations do. But what we've done differently is we've actually signed up very hard commitments on gender diversity across levels. So I think, what gets measured gets done. So I think one of the sort of differentiating factors for us is that we've signed up to hard numbers. All leaders are committed to gender diversity, and we've kind of, while we've done broadly as an organization, we've tied up to numbers. In each country as well, we have committed a lot to improving gender diversity. And of course, there are the usual initiatives that we have, which are very effective in terms of promotion cohorts or hiring cohorts, to make sure that we're getting the pipeline in. But obviously, we have to grapple with a lot of situations, because women do opt out of careers. So how do you keep them in the workforce? So you hire at 50%, and as you move up the pyramid, the women keep sort of leaving the company. So what do you do to retain them is something that we're really sort of working on. So in my mind, I think my personal view on diversity is a multi-pronged approach. So we need the society, the family, the workplace, the government, with policies to ensure that as a country, we become sort of a gender equal kind of place.
Thank you, Madhavi. And you're absolutely right. Women fall off the workplace, and my HR manager talks about the triple M's that sort of lead to women falling out of the workplace, being marriage, maternity, and mobility. And mobility is of the the spouse sort of moving into another city or country. Can I come to Subbalakshmi and sort of I've heard quite a bit of data. We've been in another panel discussion, and one of the things that I've been really inspired by is Melinda Gates' moment of lift. And one of the things that she speaks about is the power of choice in terms of when a lady or a woman decides to have a child, and that really sort of impacting quality of life. um, um, and I think that's true even for me personally. We have sort of waited about 6 to 7 years to have my baby, to kind of give me enough time in my career to find a foothold and have my baby when I was ready. But just in terms of the work that you do, um, what's your context and thinking around future of the workplace? And what does data say from the Gates Foundation?
Yeah, thanks so much, Asha. It's great to be here. And I think I'll just pick up from something that Madhavi and you also said earlier, that things have changed in many decades. I mean, clearly over generations, we've seen the choices and opportunities we have, our mothers may not have had. And, these things really take a long time over generations to change. And I also think that I've seen a change in the last 7 months. I mean, now is we're having webinars and meetings where it's acceptable for our children to run in, and the whole scenario is just completely different. So what does the future look like? I really can't say, but I can just say that it's changing rapidly, and it's in many different ways, in the way that the workplace looks like, in the way that the conditions of work are shaping up. So I think it's a rapidly changing, very dynamic environment in which we operate. And therefore, I think it's all the more important as we think about the future for us to maybe step back and just think about, okay, what in the past has really helped in terms of that tipping point, or as you were saying, the moment of lift, what has helped to really move from either shift a norm, or to shift these power relations, or to move from having no opportunity to better opportunities. And in that, I think that it's very important to really note here that there have been significant changes in laws and policies. I think that's an important part of how change happens. One is society defines laws, but laws can also define norms. At a point at which Domestic Violence Act became an act and legally a crime, it gets a sanction in a sense from the legal institution as being defined as a crime, and maybe society has changed since then or not, or at least it's acceptable to speak up much more than it was before it became a law. So that's one thing. I think laws are very, very critical in the way that they can shape some of these changes. Normative shifts can also only just happen, if there is, Madhvi, as you said, continuous discussion, continuous training, engagement with, how is it that I'm living my life, and what is it that I can do better as a person, as a professional, that can really, and the choices that I make that can help move the needle. And finally, something that we believe very strongly in is really generating an ecosystem where it becomes acceptable to either highlight these things and to engage with stakeholders who we think have the influence to make a change. And I think that creating with ecosystem is a really important learning, even as we look back, because all of these laws and normative shifts haven't come from the air. They have come from very consistent and persistent women's movements and activism and action on the ground by Seva, by so many others out there. That I think is so. I think it's very important for us to, as we think about the future, to look back on some of what has worked in the past, which is really bringing visibility, and that's where we believe again a lot in highlighting the data and evidence on what's going on out there. So really bringing visibility, but also bringing voice, which Seva has shown us so well. The best way to do it is by organizing women workers in unions, in cooperatives, in their economic production, and in their economic activities. So I think these are the principles that I think we must keep in mind also as we move into the future around bringing visibility and creating voice.
Thank you, Ms. Nandi. And I think it's a really important point that you sort of bring about where there is actual activism and proactive voicing of inequalities that sort of supported us in the 70s. I think there was a Burn the Bras feminism movement, and now I think it's a bit more subtle, but still a very important piece of activism to sort of continue in order to make sure that women continue to sort of get equal voice, equal diversity, but at the same time sort of can override now, at least in the corporate world, unconscious biases, etc. And we always talk about calling out behaviors, and I think that's a really important point that you bring about. Ranjana, can I come to you on your thoughts, having heard the panelists around future of the workforce, and of course, you're in the tech world, although you've been navigating a corporate career as well, so you've got a holistic experience from where you can talk about.
Thank you so much, Asha, and thank you, IIM Ahmedabad, for having us here. And it's such an esteemed panel, and all of you have talked about most of the things, so I'm not going to repeat myself. I'll try to be as short as possible. This quote really, has always stayed with me. You are the universe, but society teaches limitation. And this is by Alan Watts, which brings together two realities separated by who you are and what you choose to be. In my opinion, and we all know that society has failed to harness the energy and creativity of its women, which is huge disadvantage to the modern world. As we talk about the women in the workforce, one of the key determinants for equal participation of the women is access to education. And this is also one of my favorite quotes, which I've heard from childhood and which has stayed with me, that if you want to plant for a year, plant rice. If you want to plant for 20 years, plant trees. But if you want to plan for 100 years, plant education. This is truer for girl education, and I'm a firm believer for this. When you look at the pyramid, we all know that representation of women at the lower levels is high, and then it falls as it goes up the ladder. I believe that a concerted effort, not by the organizations in the private, public, and social efforts, but by the government, is very key to make this happen. And there are two things which I would like to say for the future of the workplace. One is gender-based occupational segregation. And we face that all the time, that these roles are only suited for women. Why can't it be for all types of women can be suited for all types of roles? That's a conscious and subconscious bias that we are all, sort of privy to. Another is underrepresentation of women in some sectors and in leadership and board level roles. And that, we all know about, and we can talk about it later. Organizations can do a lot. We have talked about it. I'm not going to, talk in depth about it. Organizations can do a lot about it as well. The other thing I wanted to say about in the pandemic, we talked about in the COVID has brought about a lot of change. But we have seen that the countries which were ruled by women, especially nearer to home, if you look at Bangladesh, look at what Sheikh Hasina has done. She rolled out an economic package, and she has done much better than maybe what our country has done. And I'm being very frank about it. When we look at Angela Merkel of Germany, not immediately, but earlier in the days, if we look at, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, or for the Norwegian Prime Minister, and even President Wen of Taiwan, who managed the pandemic so well, they've been like the guiding star, the North Star, among all the male counterparts. You cannot deny them that they've done exceedingly well. I personally believe that a woman is a dimension, a value to the organization, its needs, and it's not enough to just honor women and their contributions every year on March 8th on International Women's Day with cupcakes, roses, and a card. Thank you.
That's a powerful point that you make. We do have March 8th celebrations, and it's really interesting. One of the things that I mentioned, sort of tweeting a very long time ago, I had Rupa, who was, helping me around in the house, and there was Monica, who was my cook. And we had a wonderful celebration virtually because I was doing a virtual job on the 8th of March. And I was thinking, Rupa and Monica have no idea that today is, International Women's Day, or they don't really care, they want to sort of work for their children so that they have a better future. And yeah, it doesn't apply to the whole cross section of society in women. Shalini, if I may come to you, I think we can potentially go into the personal stories as well from here on. And while I was sort of reading, the New York Times just came about. Somebody was writing about pulling out the archives from New York Times, and in the 1926, they say that it was pretty parenting advice began to take shape in a way that seemed thoroughly contemporary. And one of the excerpts was job analysis and proper husbands were essentials for this reconciliation. By proper husbands, she meant the kind who were willing to go 50-50 to make a wife's career possible. And job analysis, she interpreted as a kind of industrial engineering applied to dishwashing and children's bath and feeding. This is 1926. And then very interestingly, there's another 1950 magazine that talks about tips to look after your husband. And it says, prepare yourself, clear away the clutter, prepare your children, make them quiet, minimalize all noise, don't greet your husbands with problems or complaints, don't complain if he's late for dinner, make him comfortable, listen to him, make the evening his, and the goal is to try to make your home a place of peace and order. So it's and some of this still continue, right? We want a contemporary world where women are sort of provided with equal opportunity, etc. And then there is this sort of overarching social need to sort of have the women be super women in some senses, to sort of continue keeping the house perfect. And in India specifically, joint family setup, etc. The expectations are very 1950s in some senses. So, given that you've sort of come to where you are and worked in all sorts of Fortune 500 organizations, would you be able to sort of talk about your own personal journey as well as your own opening remarks on future of the workplace for women?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for inviting me as a panelist here. And I think, Asha, to your question, I will begin by saying that, while I'm, taking this seminar, this summit, it is, my husband in the background, who is taking care of the children and, doing the dishes and, trying to manage the house so that I can have this conversation in peace. So, while we say, in the last couple of years, or maybe in the last 20-30 years, the role of men or the role of women, was treated differently. But I think looking at the current scenarios, women are making their mark in every field, right? If we talk about Shivani Singh, right? She was selected as the Rafale, a female fighter pilot. If I talk about, Rekha Menon, right? She is the CMD of Accenture and currently a leading industry voice on technology-led innovations. So these are certain areas where, which were spearheaded by men. But now, we are seeing that women are also breaking that, barrier and, coming across as a strong foundation in all these fields. But, if I talk about maybe, just, my story, I would say it has been a roller coaster ride. I qualified as a chartered accountant, around 18 years back. And then, I kicked off my professional journey from working in Big Fours to switching to different, Fortune 100 companies in the shared service domain. So the career graph, I would say, has not been linear. I have had my sets of progressions as well as sabbaticals. They have been two sides of the same coin. When I started my career, I got good opportunity to work in different organizations. The first dilemma that came was when I got married in 2005, and at the same time I got an opportunity to go to a transition to US for say 3 to 6 months. At that point in time, I just started my new phase of life, so I let go of that opportunity and wanted to enjoy that thing in particular. Then as you mentioned, right, marriage, maternity, mobility, right? So coming on, to the maternity side, I got, I had my first child in 2009. And at that point in time, I would like to maybe, bring Madhavi's point to HR policies as well, that, the company used to allow 3 months of maternity leave. However, because of the previous hard work, as we say, the hard work pays off, due to the hard work as well as the support of the organization, that I was working in, I was able to get further extension of 3 months and, enjoy that first motherhood experience. I resumed work, after 6 months and then moved on. But then, as we say, life has its surprises in store for you. So I had to quit job in 2010 because, as you mentioned, I did not have a robust, you can say, system at place. There was, not a robust ecosystem around where, I could continue with my first child. So, yes, I did quit my job and I did, have to take that plunge in my career initially. But then, I again got back to the corporate world within a span of 1 year. I looked for a job and, landed with an opportunity with the same company, and that too at a senior level, that too at a higher level. So I think, that's where if we see that, the organizations, the society has evolved over a period of time, they are acknowledging, the contribution of women. And then, when I joined the organization in 2011, that was the start of, my second innings. I had my child, the second child in 2012, and due to work commitments, this time, within a span of 3 months, I transitioned to a new role in US. Again, the contribution of spouse here comes in. While, I was on a transition, leaving behind a 3-4 month child at home and the, elder one, it was my spouse, who was taking care of children with the, his regular job. So I think I would say, there will be like, peaks and troughs in your career, but I think over a period of time, I think you somehow have to, learn to manage it well. So yes, the society is evolving. It will take, yes, certainly a number of more years to evolve, but I think we are still, paving that way ahead.
It's really interesting you say that because recently, I sort of came across this book called The Squiggly Career. So apparently you don't have this static corporate ladder that we, our parents went through. And, we sort of keep moving from one organization to another organization. And because of the sabbaticals, etc., that we take, our career is not like a linear path. It's squiggly in some senses. And we've got to sort of keep reinventing ourselves, keep re-upskilling ourselves, etc. But also the role of the spouse is really critical as well. And for me personally, I think one of the things that really helped me is my parents. I'm a single daughter, and my parents just said after having my baby that, they just come and stay with us. And in pursuing dual careers, we've sort of had what is called a commuter marriage, which I, after researching, realized that there are millions of couples who sort of live in commuter marriages, where both of us were in different cities. So when I was heading finance for the retail business for Shell for the country, for 2 years, I was in Bangalore for a couple of weeks and Calcutta for a couple of weeks every month, where between the time my daughter was 3 to the time she was 5, and she was with, her dad and my parents. And now, we're sort of doing the reverse. Now that I'm CFO for Shell's gas business in the country in Ahmedabad, I brought my daughter and my mom and my dog here, and Karthik, my spouse, does the back and forth, coming over the weekend and going back. Although with the pandemic, this has been the silver lining. He's been with us, and we've all been working out of different rooms, and her doing homeschooling as well. So the concept of dual careers and managing dual careers becomes really crucial in some senses. And an HBR study talks about if men perceive their wives to be breadwinners and equal partners, then, they sort of invest in their careers as much as against, they were to talk about treat their career, the spouse's career, as secondary. And when I was talking to the committee who was sort of helping put this together, we realized that there's an opportunity out there because there are a number of young college-going students, graduates, etc., who will, have partners, and really critical to sort of prioritize your career as much as your partner's career, whatever gender you are, right? And I do want to come to Subbalakshmi here, and you have been sort of anointed the top 100 women in for BBC, etc. So clearly, and the gender head for the Gates Foundation. And we'd love to hear your story. That's one of the things, again, that the students told us, that everybody would be really keen to hear about your career journeys, so they can draw some lessons out of that.
Thanks, Asha. And like I said, I promise I'll give you my version of it. I think, so, it's very difficult for me to talk about my journey because there is no way I look at my career or professional sort of trajectory as an individual journey. And I think very early on, I made choices. I mean, I spent like the first decade of my professional life working with very grassroots women's organizations, again with a focus on tribal and marginalized women in rural, remote parts of the country. And I do believe that those first 10 years is the foundation of who I have become as a professional, as a person, and have affected all my life choices since then. So I think that was really foundational for me, the first 10 years of that really grassroots work with NGOs, because I think what attracted me to that work was that life was not about your individual success or your individual sort of growth only. It was also that, but it was really about standing as part of a larger movement to shift gender norms, to shift the broader perspective on where women can reach, on who needs the maximum resources and support, on and how we as people who have been brought up in very privileged backgrounds can also become part of that journey. And I don't think it's a matter of giving back. I think it's also about getting a lot back. I feel what I got back in return was immense, and I think since then also the choices of where I have worked have been institutions, sometimes very large institutions. I have worked for the UN, I work now for the Gates Foundation, but have always been in support of that agenda, where I'm able to still support partners and to support the vision, which is really aiming for that kind of gender transformation. And so I think that it was, and of course, one's life choices at the end of the day are also affected a great deal by that work and that politics, the feminist politics that one learns. I think at some point in my life, I decided I wanted to have a family. As a single person, I adopted a baby. So I am a single parent of a daughter. And, so I do feel that these are both professional and personal choices that I have made because fundamentally, there is a worldview I have. I've just been lucky to always had, in a sense, success in a traditional sense. I have had the chance to be in leadership. I have had the chance to be in a position of influence. But like I said, that's not what I value about my journey. I think what I value about my journey is the fact that I get to be part of something much larger than myself. So I'll stop there.
I'm such a big fan. I've always been, but I haven't known this context. But that's an interesting one. My psychologist, also a good friend, and her brother was sort of just graduating out of college, and he had two options. One was a job, that had a great pay, and there was another, and he sort of chose the latter, which was a Teach in India voluntary role, for a year or so. And what we are realizing, and even with Shell, which is a traditional oil and gas organization, we're realizing with millennials, purpose is paramount. And I think you've sort of beat that generation and you've been ahead of the curve, Sublakshmi. But increasingly, millennials want to go into roles that give them purpose, either be it giving back to society, or sort of being part of advocacy around real current issues such as climate change. And that's a powerful reminder that we're sort of speaking to a young audience who potentially don't want a classic corporate role, who want to sort of go and give back to society, learn from the grassroots. And I think that's where Rima Ben and Subbulakshmi, both of you are sort of the torch bearers in some senses. And I'd love to volunteer in Seva at one point, to be honest with you. And now that I'm in Ahmedabad, I'd love to do that. So Ms. Nanavati, again, coming back to you, you're a Padma Shri awardee. You've sort of been, in the company of really influential people, global leaders in some senses. But what's been disarmingly refreshing. I've seen a few TED Talks of yours over the years, and you haven't really changed. You've always sort of been this person, at least from whatever I've seen, uh, as somebody with a lot of humility, who sort of are always thinking about the women that sort of you're working with, and the Seva women. And I'm just sort of really inspired by that. So what has your journey been like, and how are you the person that you are?
I was just listening to Shalini Ben and Sublakshmi Ben, and I said, oh, wow, what a journey. Really hats off to you all. My journey has been, how do I say it? There was an option whether I go to the Indian Administrative Service or I go and work with the women with whom I am here. And it was really a difficult decision. There was a lot of pressure that one should opt for the administrative services, but somehow I felt like I would get much more satisfaction if I worked at Seva. And so I took the tough decision. I resigned from the services. And my family thought that I have gone mad. Nobody would do something like this. My grandfather was a trade union leader. He was the general secretary of the Textile Labor Association that was founded by Mahatma Gandhi. My mother-in-law worked in the same union, and then she founded the Self-Employed Women's Association where I am. So there was a family tradition going on. My husband knew what it means when somebody is working at Seva. Very often he comes on very strongly, and when you tell him that, oh, you could have said the same thing in a different way, he said, but you don't realize that, until I speak strongly, you don't listen. And that comes as a big reminder that, oh, okay. But I think what I learned from our members is that lifelong learning that stays with me. That it's one thing you read about poor, you read about poverty, and it's very different when you yourself experience the life and the work of the poor. And I think having been born and brought up in a city in an upper middle class family, when you are really exposed to, like Shubhalakshmi Ben was saying, that her first 10 years of working with the tribal women, I think it really makes you understand where do you need to put all your efforts and energies are. And I think I went and stayed in Banaskantha, which is a very dry desert area, for the first 10 years when I worked at Seva. And my big learning came from there. When my first son was born, he was only like Shalini Ben was saying, 3 months. And, I started taking him to the villages with me wherever I went. I have 2 boys, and I never wanted them to feel that your mother goes away every now and then on a pleasure trip. So I always made it a point to take both my sons with me whenever till the age when it was possible. Luckily, their school also allowed, because this was an experiential learning that I told that school was. And I think I was very clear that either they would love what I'm doing and they would respect it, and then when they grow up they would become more supportive and cooperative, or they would hate what I'm doing. But one way or the other, I had to take it. And I started taking both my sons to wherever I went. My second son was born in the year of the earthquake in Gujarat. And the chief secretary had called a big meeting, and I had to tell the chief secretary that I have a 1.5-month-old son, and I will bring him to the meeting if you don't mind. And either he says yes or he says no, and he couldn't dare to say no because that would put him in a spot. So it was a big meeting of all the secretaries, and I was there with my 1.5-year-old son, and everybody was, for the first few minutes taken aback. But this is what the reality of all women. Their wives also must be going through all this. And so I think that is what my journey has been. And so my members love my sons as well. They all are looking forward. When will they be able to attend their wedding? We celebrate every occasion together, whether it's something that they achieve in their educational journey or in their career journey or anything. We all celebrate it together. We go to one or the other village, we go to one or the other state. Every festival also we try to celebrate with our members, and that's how I integrate them into the part of the larger Seva family. And I always feel that, a family is a unit of organizing, but under women's leadership. So if you give women that opportunity to lead the family, then the family starts adapting and cooperating. But if you try to become a feminist kind of a thing, then there is bound to be resistance. But I think when the woman starts bringing in knowledge, bringing in skills, bringing in hard cash income, I think her role also gets changed. She gets respect, she's able to participate in the decision making processes in the families, in the community, in the society, and then she's able to take on leadership positions. I'm talking about the women that I work with. Luckily, I haven't worked in a corporate sector, so the challenges there may be really difficult. And sorry, if I'm taking longer, you can always stop me, Asha ji. Thank you so much.
No, please. This is a powerful story to be heard in full.
So I have spoken. Thank you. My last thing I want to say here when you are talking about personal stories is that women should be seen as investing in human capital, because the rate of return that you get by investing or building a human capital as women as human capital is short term and long term. And the long term, when I say, is that when you invest in building human capital of women as women, they would look at their children's development, their family's development, and therefore it's a long-term development. And I think that's what the countries and the policymakers need to realize. Thank you.
No, that's again a very pertinent point, which UNICEF Chief Gujarat Lakshmi Bhavani had also told me at one point, where she said, if you empower women, what you're sort of making sure is their children, are provided for, protected, and given the adequate nutrition and education and intellectual stimulation. So when you actually empower women, we're empowering the next generation as well, which is a really good point. And you've done what Jacinda Allen now did, taking your babies to meetings. And I think that's one thing corporate women haven't had the opportunity to do. And we've been talking about it. So when I was sort of working partly in the UK, as finance manager for digital ventures, we had this office in the WeWork building in Aldwych. And this was away from the traditional shell office that we had. and dogs were allowed in. And I was wondering, why aren't children allowed? So what I was told is, and there was beer and prosecco on Friday nights, etc. But the point is, children were not allowed, and the response was, well, dogs can be quiet, but children can't be, and sort of are distracting. So even in the coolest workplaces, hi,
Yeah, can I just add an anecdote here? So when
Yeah,
I
please
used to
do.
work with UN Women, that's when, is when I brought my baby home. She was 3 months old, and there were at least 3 or 4 colleagues who had young kids. A lot of it depends on the employer's initiative as well. They actually set up a whole space for us within the office premises, where, our children could be close to us. And I have to tell you, it wasn't just great for me and for others like me who came back after maternity leave. It was very productive for the workplace in terms of the culture, in terms of, the environment, in terms of the spirit and the levels of motivation. There are pictures that I have of meetings when I was in that office where, kids are on our laps and we are making very serious presentations and things like that. So I think a lot depends on the employer and, and in terms of creating these spaces. It just has to, like I said earlier, be made visible. And then it seems like it's the most natural thing to do. And you're right, maybe in the corporate sector, the opportunities have been much less than in the NGO or the development sector, where I have also worked, where it's kind of maybe, I don't know, maybe a little bit more accessible, or I don't know.
So we do have crashes. So Karthik, my husband, Tata Steel, has a crash called Muskan, where he used to take my baby to, and similarly in Shell in Bangalore, also, there was a crash as well, where colleagues have shown me their babies as well. But there's an interesting one. This is not either of our companies, but another anecdote that I read, where there was a lady who had a 7-month-old in the crash, and then apparently her colleagues would call her out every time she'd sort of go out for a coffee or something, and they'd be like, "Are you going back to your baby again?" And she stopped bringing her baby. So this is neither of our companies. It's a completely different organization, anonymized, of course. So there is one around providing that infrastructure, but also the mindset, and that's where the unconscious biases kick in as well. So Ranjana, if I
can I add something
sure,
to this? So while we are saying that obviously this pandemic has brought about many adverse things. I think for women, at least like me, pandemic has been a blessing in disguise. We are talking about, right, children. So obviously in the corporate world, children are in school, and we go to office and then come back and then meet our children. But during this lockdown time, the children are seeing how much effort, how much hard work, their parents, their mother is putting in, household chores. We don't have any, domestic help as of now. Household chores, office management, everything. I think that's where, they've become more kind and, more adaptive to, understand that, it is equally important, as well as it takes a lot of hard work, for their mom to, the manage the way, she tries to every single day. So I think children do learn, the way they see.
No, absolutely. And that's the other thing around working women as well, right? One of the things that I've sort of thought about sabbatical several times. And then, my spouse has been like, if you're going to take a sabbatical, I'm going to take a sabbatical as well. But increasingly, what we very quickly realized is role modeling for the children is also really critical. And if you are sort of working mother, then, they sort of imbibe that as the normal, and of course they kind of learn from of this. So really important point as well. Ranjana, if I may come to you, I know you've got a completely different personal story, and I think that's another thing that's really adds to the diversity of the stories that we have here. So if you could share, please.
Thank you, Asha. I'll just, give a little background. I grew up in Rourkela. It's a small steel town city. My father was a double engineer. My mother was a master's in English literature from Randa House, Delhi in the 50s. So I had very progressive parents. So did not hesitate to send me for higher studies 31 years back. So for most of the students who are listening here who were not even born, to the US in 1989. So that was a big leap of faith for many, but my parents were totally cool about it. And I went to the University of New Haven, where now I'm, in a leadership position. Life has come a full circle. And I went there in 89 when there was no internet, there was no connectivity, nothing. And I think that was my greatest learning, because it opened up my complete horizon, working with international students, professors, everything. I have always chosen the path less traveled by. When it was the dream of every Indian, and it was so easy that time to stay back in the US. In 91, when I finished my MBA, I decided to come back to India. And I will owe it to one person. All of you must have heard of FICCI, the person who has put software in the global map of the world, Fakir Chand Kohli of TCS, who interviewed me and said that, we need you back. We need people like you back, and come back. And I was wanting to come back to India. I didn't want to stay back in the US. I came back to India, started working in Air India building in Mumbai. And that's where my journey started. Worked in TCS, amazing experience, worked in Wipro for 16 years after that. I wouldn't say that there have not been challenges. There have been challenges. There have been roadblocks. There have been setbacks, but there have been glass ceilings, but I have broken most of them. A couple of things that come to my mind, I know we would run out of time, so I'm trying to keep it short, is that I didn't change my maiden name. At a time like that, it was not common for women not to change my maiden name. My colleagues and everyone else used to ask that, are you not going to change your maiden name? I said, no, I'm not. I had to give some excuse that it's difficult to get paperwork and passports done, which was not the case at all. I just didn't want to change my identity, because I married married someone from I'm Bengali. I married someone from UP, Allahabad. I just didn't want to change my identity. It was very dear to me. I don't think it makes a difference if you change your name. That was one part. Second part, I think Asha will ask me that question and I will answer it before. It was not a real decision, but because I was so invested in my career, it just happened that I didn't have children. I have a very, very fine niece whom I'm extremely fond of, and she's like my daughter. So I never felt that I didn't have children, and I was so invested in my career. So there are certain glass ceilings that I have broken in my journey as well. My spouse has been my biggest support system. He has taken a back seat in his career to ensure that I could move forward and go into leadership roles all through. And I would not hesitate to see, and now I feel maybe a bit guilty. I was signing a multi-million-dollar deal in the US, and my husband had to be admitted in the ICU. I called my niece from Delhi to attend to him, and I stayed back for that 1.5 days to sign the deal and come back. Was it right? At that time, I thought it was. If you ask me now, maybe no. So these are choices that you do at some points of time. Sometimes you learn to regret them. Sometimes you think that they are not so okay, but you live with those choices. Setbacks and challenges, I have faced biases. Unconscious bias is there all through. As Madhavi talked about it, we cannot do away with it. I have faced biases. I was at a young age, I was appointed as the CEO of a new unit which we had bought in Wipro, and I was supposed to integrate it. It was not easy because they were not used to women leaders. So I had to work on my other skills to ensure, and I think women have a lot of other skills to ensure that, they sort of, do all that, and plus make that unit profitable, integrate it to the main Wipro, mainstream Wipro, and ensure that you turn it from red to black. I did all that. So, and also, I think my learnings at the foundation years, and I think Subbalakshmi mentioned, I think foundation years are very important. I think what I studied at the University of New Haven, working with multiple international students, I never stayed with Indians because there were so many few Indian girls. I stayed with a plethora of Indian, overseas students, international students, and many of them were boys. My parents were totally okay with it 31 years back, and I stayed with them. I'm still friends with them. And I learned a lot about cultures, and culture is just not about diversity. Culture comes across with so many things: ethnicity, sexual orientation, everything, race, everything. It's such a, it's such a complicated topic about diversity and culture. And, in my last role at Wipro, when I was heading a 3,000 workforce across 3 continents, across 12 delivery locations, it was so easy for me because what I would do in Philippines with with my team will be completely different what I will do in Bucharest in Romania, or what I will do in Atlanta in US, or Syracuse, or in Mexico. So those learnings were very, very handy for me. So I think as a woman also it helps because we are empathetic by nature. At the same time, we are firm and we are able to do a lot of things. I think, I'll stop it at that, Asha. I think I can go on, but I'll just stop it at that. Thank you.
No, thanks, Ranjana. And I think a couple of things. There was a choice that you made to not have a child, and I think that's also a choice that is available and should be exercised if that particular woman feels that's the right path for her.
Yeah.
And the second thing is. This is another one that sort of impacts both men and women. I've been in my bi-monthly stint in the UK with a virtual role, every time my daughter had pujo and a dance, event, I would be in the UK, and it was a leadership meet and so on. Now, when I look back in Ahmedabad, she doesn't have all that many opportunities to have, dance events anymore, dance performances anymore, and I miss that. And when you look back, you wonder if you made the right choice. But at the same time, it's also momentary. You can't really go back and go on a guilt trip. My spouse had sent me this article from HBR again that said, "Be the dad." Where women, are so guilt prone about everything. They want to be perfect homemakers. They want to be great at their job. They want to be great moms. Whereas, dads kind of are in the moment, but then they're able to switch off and enjoy themselves. So I don't know if there's a neurological wiring that makes them different. But I've seen that my spouse at least is able to do that quite well.
Just
If I
add
can,
one point here, Asha. I don't think I ever do that guilt trip. I think that's the most damaging thing that you can do to yourself. I never go on a guilt trip as a woman. And I think, if you've chosen something, give it your 150%. And one more point, I gave it all up when I had a rocking career and I took a sabbatical. You mentioned about sabbatical. And that was also my choice. So, and then I joined my university. So it's all about choices. And I think women should have the power to make the choices in their lives. I think that's very important.
so true. Madhavi, if I can come back to you, and I'll sort of combine potentially your personal story narrative together with, HR policies that we want to talk about. And there is an article that talks about why long-term flexible work options could be a game changer for women, given, the pandemic has already shown that a number of jobs can be done at home. And it talks about the opportunity for uninterrupted careers. It talks about a more equitable division of at home labor. But at the same time, we also know that there is going to be unconscious biases, and women having to deal with unconscious biases. And it's not just women, right? We're also talking about the LGBTQ communities, which potentially have a greater bias and odds stacked against them. We're also talking about women being disproportionately impacted by digital transformation. They're also currently underrepresented in STEM-related professions, and we potentially need to sort of target reskilling to accelerate gender diversity. So back to you on what are the policies that you would think would potentially help. One is to have your hard targets, etc., but also to overcome unconscious biases and the likes, together with your personal story, of course.
Thanks, Asha. Very inspiring stories, I think, to hear all of you. And I think something that Rima Ben said earlier, I thought I'd share a story of my mom. My mother came from a very well-to-do family. She's a master's MA in Hindi, so well qualified, but she chose to be a homemaker. And when she was 40, and there were three of us, me and my two brothers, we went through some serious financial issues, and she had never worked her entire life. And I don't know how I could really ask her how she thought of it, but she said I have to support the family income. And she started doing tuitions, and she's raised the three of us, our education, whatever. I just think that's something that Rima, when you said earlier about women who can just I mean, I don't know how she did it, because not having worked ever, and she just went on to do that. And I remember she used to get up at 5 in the morning, cook for the whole family, go and do the tuitions entire day, come back late in the night, take care of us. I don't know how she managed. I think it was, I mean, she's an inspiration. I don't think I can ever, match up to that. But from a corporate side, personal stories, there are many, obviously 30 years of career. So I'll just share a couple of them. One is when I was having my son, that was 4 years into my career. And I came back to after the maternity leave. So this was 3 months maternity leave, and then 3 months I took leave without pay. And I came back, and my boss, who's a lovely person, I'm still in touch with him. He said to me that okay, you were not here for 6 months. So while you in the 6 months you were here, you've done a spectacular job. I have to cut your rating down by 1, and I have to lower your increment and bonus. And I was like, how is this happening? That was the first time I suddenly realized that I am at a disadvantage because I'm a woman, and I thought to myself, I said, if I ever get to a position where I can impact these policies, and I'll do that, and I think I'm particularly very happy that in 2007, when I sort of became the head of HR in the company that I worked in at that time, we were able to implement a lot of the policies that were women friendly. We launched the 6-month maternity leave. We said that anybody who goes on maternity leave, you will look at the rating for the time the person was here, not for the full, not take away the rating and the proportion. And I think in that sense, the corporate world has changed, but obviously more to do. And obviously, as a mother, for me, there have been many times when I've thought to myself, should I really give up my career? Am I really being a good mom by being away when my son has important stuff happening in school, or but I stayed the course, and thanks to my husband, he's hugely supportive. I don't think I would have been able to do what I did without his support. So from a family point of view, I always had the support, whether it's my parents or my my husband, my in-laws. Hugely supportive. So, but yes, in the corporate world, if I talk about policies, Asha, honestly, I think we've done a lot. I think while I know you said that hard measures are one part of it, but I think this whole bit about biases, not just for gender, is something that we really need to focus on. And this year we've kind of launched a lot more programs to raise this unconscious bias awareness, because you have to be aware that there are unconscious biases, right? And all of us have them. It's not that I don't have bias. As a human being, you will have a bias based on how you've grown up. So that, I think, definitely is a key thing. But I think also we've got to start sort of building women right from the start. So I think when women come into the workforce, right from that point of time, if we can help them through their whole journey, that I think would be a sort of huge game changer.
Madhavi, just can you elaborate on, sort of helping the women on their journeys? And I think that's an important one that you draw on. We talk about, at least in Shell, we talk about mentors and sponsors and buddies and so on. Is that what you meant, or was there something more?
That definitely, that definitely is there. But also, I think a little bit of counseling. So we've had a few examples, in the last couple of years, where women have sort of come to us saying that, I have a baby now, and I need to go back to, I need to resign. And we've offered them options of, either sabbatical or long-term leave, or even saying that, there could be some job that you can do part-time. So we do have something called part-time working. So a woman can, or a man also can choose to work part-time. So giving that flexibility, I think, to have women stay at work. The other thing that we have done is, and I think that's been done by many organizations, return to work. So women who've taken the leave but want to come back, that is something that will help. But a lot more of that. And I think to your point about having this whole now virtual working pretty much embedded will definitely help these talent pools, and not just women. I think if it's people who probably are in second, third year towns, or people who are differently abled who can't actually physically come into work, right? So a lot of that employment, so the pool will become available, and that I think will help women to my mind, especially the corporate world.
And you are considering further flexible policies as well, as you speak, giving up real estate and things like that, or is that?
It's not a real estate focused strategy. I think it is more about what will work for us. But Asha, just want to clarify that banking is a service that is governed by the DOT guidelines. So there are a lot of work that cannot be done from home. So we'll have to figure out how the laws around that evolve. I want to be very frank and honest here. if the laws provide, we will definitely be able to offer that flexibility.
Thank you, Madhavi. I think that's a really valid point. And again, back to the women as well as boys are going into work is concerned. The support network that you kind of get through mentors and sponsors. Sponsors are normally invisible, but mentors and buddies are really crucial. And one of the things that I've learned, at least from my career, is you don't sort of wait for a company to sort of assign a mentor to you. You go ahead and sort of go after people who inspire you, who you have personal chemistry with, and ask to be mentored, and sort of go and take your dilemmas to that person. And it need not be one mentor, it can be a whole host of mentors, providing you solutions to dilemmas, to various problems. Some of them, work related, some of them personal and circumstance related as well. So now coming to Subbalakshmi, the UN Secretary General and everybody who's talking about pandemic policies, saying put girls and women at the center of of any relief benefit, because all of the progress that we've made can be wiped out if we don't do that. And I'd like to sort of again come back, and this is not so much policy but potentially law, and that's why I'm coming to you. Is what we see in Norway, for instance, where parents have paternity policies. Women get about 46 weeks of at full salary. Parents get 46 weeks at full salary, 56 weeks at 80% salary. And paternity leave has created a culture for Norwegian fathers to be more active parents than just secondary caregivers. And I'd like to sort of draw your thoughts around this, from the work that you've done, and any other statistic that you may want to sort of highlight in the journey to equality.
Yeah, thanks, Asha. I know we're running out of time, so I won't go into too much, but I think the kinds of gender norms that we've been talking about, they get very much reflected in the kind of data that we see around us. I mean, whether it's in terms of the gender pay gap, which for India still remains between 50 to, women are earning about 50 to 75% of what men are earning at the same level, whether it's in terms of labor force participation, whether it's women doing 10 times more unpaid work than men. The data is only a reflection of the kind of norm that persists. And like you said, it's the fundamental belief in our in our ecosystem is that men are primary breadwinners, and women's incomes is only supportive or secondary and not primary, and that they are not economic agents, despite the fact that they might be collecting water and fuel wood and childcare, and there's a range of, if you look at the majority of the women in our country, there is a whole lot of unpaid work that is happening, which is also beyond just childcare, right? Particularly in the rural, poor, remote areas. So if that continues to be the norm, the data is going to tell us the same. We know women's enterprises are, the smallest, least, they're mostly about more than 90%, I think, earn less than 25,000 rupees a month. Why is that? These are the enterprises that Seva is trying to boost up to create market opportunities for. But it comes from it's like a chain reaction. Because there is a norm, there is lack of resources, there is lack of property ownership. Because of that, the access to capital is limited. Therefore, women cannot become entrepreneurs. So what are some of the solutions in really boosting and bridging those gaps that can help move forward? So I think in many ways the idea is that so one of the things that I want to say is that the pandemic has only exacerbated a few of the inequalities that already existed. I mean, unfortunately, it's not like these issues didn't exist earlier, whether it's unpaid work or women's dropping out from the labor market. That's something that was an issue for us as a region and as a country before the pandemic, and the pandemic has exacerbated, which is why I think now is the urgency that if we don't build back better, or if we don't think about it in the recovery, if we don't design policies and programs for it, then it may be an irreversible loss. The UN says that 47 million women and girls are going to go back into poverty. What will it mean for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? So I think the point is that, of course, the pandemic has affected all of us, but if we don't keep women and girls at the center, I think the point is the inequalities that existed will always just get further exacerbated. And I think the solution, therefore, is knowing there is not a level playing field. There has to be intentional policies. There has to be intentional programs, whether it's the government or the private sector, whether it's employers. It has to be designed. It will not happen automatically. And I think that's my sort of one message, that we have to very intentionally think of how to bring women back into the labor market and how to address some of these other issues. And we know from literature there is a lot of solutions about free and affordable childcare. We know that job creation of certain kinds, which will enable women to come back, support to micro enterprises, support to women's collective social enterprises in the rural and remote areas. I think what is required in terms of their access to finance and their support so that they can, access markets and grow their businesses in this post-pandemic stage. So I think that's really one of the data is very grim. The recent McKinsey report also said that I think about half of the women's enterprises are shutting down either temporarily or permanently, and may or may not renew their businesses. So it's not a very happy situation, but I think, like I said, if we're intentional about the solutions, there's no reason why we can't come out of this. As some have said, just press a reset button. It's not about building back better. Also, some have said that we have to just reset, and that's the opportunity that I see ahead of us.
Thank you, Subbalakshmi. I think that's a really great one, where you have to be intentional about designing policy because we know that it is not a level playing field. And I think that argument is a really powerful one. Just in terms of closing remarks, so was that your closing remarks, or was there anything further that you would like to add, Subbalakshmi?
No, I mean, I just want to say that it's been so inspiring to hear everyone on this panel. It's like, as you know, I mean, it's been such a crazy year. And I think just to hear everybody's experience and voices in this and everybody's journeys is always reminding us, like I said at an earlier point as well, that, you're not in this alone. It may seem like it's your personal challenge or your personal journey or things like that. But the fact that, we're all in it together, and I think very, very important to have that supportive ecosystem. So thank you for creating that space.
Yeah, thanks for having me. How about you, Ms. Meenavati? Also in the socio-cultural context, and just taking, Subbalakshmi's point of, being intentional, and women entrepreneurs always have a disadvantage. So what would your closing remarks be in that context?
I think one thing I would like to say in my closing remarks is that as far as the women workers in the informal economy are concerned, for them, innovation is a coping strategy. It's their survival strategy, and therefore they are compelled to, they are forced to innovate in the post-COVID. It's not post-COVID anyway, but how do they survive in the given situation? And I think one thing we have learned very much from our experience of these last 7 months is that decentralized supply chains have given ample employment opportunities. So I think that is what, rather than having, global supply chains or national supply chains with big brands, I think they have all thrown them out from the, or their livelihoods have suddenly disappeared. But it's this small decentralized supply chains which have continued giving them the livelihood opportunities. And I think when we design policies by keeping women and girls in the center, this is one other aspect that the policymakers need to understand, that unless and until you promote these kind of decentralized local supply chains, India may not have ample of employment opportunities, especially for women. And men will anyway migrate and fend for themselves, and then leaving behind women, female-headed households to look after everything else that's mind. So I think that is very important. And the second thing I think what is very important is also that if you have to immediately restabilize your means of employment, where do they have access to finance? So I think there is an urgent need to think out of the box and create a livelihood recovery and resilience fund for the millions of women in our country, who are doing small work on their own and trying to feed their families, and so that they can have easy and immediate access. I'll just stop here with these two.
Well, thank you. And I think the supply chain one is an emerging trend as well. We talk about hyperlocal businesses and supporting hyperlocal businesses. So that's a clear policy focus that needs to be there. Ranjana, if I can come to you, there's also one question that potentially you can answer together with closing remarks. With the nature of work change for all genders, work from home has become a norm. Do women stand to gain in the form of more flexibility or lose in the form of more unpaid care work? If I could sort of have you take that question together with closing remarks, please.
What was the first question? I couldn't hear that very well.
With the nature of work change for all genders, work from home has become a norm. So do women stand to gain or lose? Gain from flexible working or lose from unpaid care work? I think it's
a good question. Yeah, I've taken a few sessions on that. I think that, what I've seen around, I think women tend to gain from that, though there have been a lot of job cuts and whatever, but I think women are coping very well with flexible working, especially during the pandemic when they are not forced to travel. Especially in a city like Mumbai, I see, just because the local trains were not running, so nobody could force them to travel as well. And women are they were always managing the workplace and their homes well, but they found new ways of doing it. Maybe getting a dedicated place from where they could work out, work from. The family started supporting them. I've heard of women who have come to me and said that now my husband takes care of other things and we have a separate place. I know, especially in larger cities, spaces are constrained, but I think it has been helpful for the women, especially in pandemic times, for the gender neutrality to come in. I think it has played a big role for organizations to realize it, and also for the for the spouses to realize that how much a part the woman used to play also in doing the household chores, because when the man is at home, he sees that too. So I think I answered that question. And my closing remarks would be that, women, I've already said that before, that in my opening remarks as well. I think it's time that we try to now raise men as, women as men. But it's time we started raising the sons as daughters. And believe me, you might laugh at this, but a lot of my friends have started doing that. And that is when the real gender equality will start seeping in right from day one, when they start doing all the chores. And that has happened even in, during the pandemic times that we have seen. Diversity at the workplace, we have all talked about it. It goes beyond gender diversity. And what you and I as women can do, keep your competencies and skills up to date. As we know, there's going to be a lot of automation going around. I'm not going to go into statistics right now, though I come from an IT background. The other thing I would like to talk about women, which we haven't talked about, is network. I think women shy away from building their own network and their ecosystem. That's a very important point. You have to network and build your own ecosystem, because you never really know when you need that network. It may be for anything else. Don't build it just for a selfish reason. It can be for anything, but build your own network. And
thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think we've got 2 minutes, but thanks. I think the network is important in raising your sons as your daughters. And my daughter's role model is James Charles, by the way. So I think we're already sort of getting gender neutral role models, which is a good thing.
Thank you.
Shalini, over to you. We've got 1 more minute. So between you and Madhavi, we've got to share a minute.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Asha. I think we've heard of, that she's a woman of substance. I think in the closing remarks, I would just like to say that, in the evolving world, it will be women of constance, which is compassion plus substance. So, be compassionate, yet be, fierce, yet be firm, yet be fearless. So, go that extra mile to achieve your ambitions and, make your mark in whatever you do. So I think
you're saying lean in, like Sheryl Sandberg, absolutely. How about you, Madhavi? Thank you, Shalini.
I think just that the task of gender balance seems very daunting, but I think there are societies and countries that have done a lot. If we all put our minds to it, we can make it happen. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Really appreciate the panel, and really sort of had a very meaningful conversation. I like to end with what is a place in the women's world, and there's a 2-3 page excerpt that I wanted to read out. There's no time, but it's really about women, sort of making their own choices. To be a scholar or to be a professional or to kind of go into voluntary service or to stay at home, it's absolutely should be your choice, and it should not be forced from anybody else, and it should be an intrinsic choice that you should be making. But thanks ever so much
Thank
to
you. Thank
IIME
you.
as well all of the panelists for this. Thank you.
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
so much
Thank you,
Thank
for
you.
Asha.
inviting.
Thank you, IIM Ahmedabad.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
So
It was a pleasure.
On the behalf of the complete TRBS team, thank you so much to everyone on the panel today for all your energy and insight for such a wonderful and lively discussion. A special thanks to our moderator, Asha Pillai, who has been an integral part of this panel since the start. It was really great and insightful to know and learn from all of your perspectives about the topic in discussion today. I would also like to thank Confederation of Indian Industries, CII, Center of Excellence for Supply Chain, as the industry partner for this panel. And finally, I would like to thank Business Standard, a financial print media partner, for their support. Thank you to the audience as well for being so patient and enthusiastic today. Next, we have a very interesting session on playing on the front foot, history of cricket, broadcasting and art of communication by Dr. Narottam Puri. Again, I would like to remind you that TRBS Speaker Series is conducting many more such sessions today and tomorrow. So kindly refer to the roster provided in the description below and